Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions, and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently now. In season 2 of the Thriving Leaders podcast, I'm interviewing thought leaders from around the world to pick their brains on what it takes to build a thriving team. This is helping me write my second book, Thriving Teams, which will be out later in the year in 2025. I hope you enjoy the podcast. In today's podcast, I speak with Grant Gemmell, Managing Director at Facet5 Global. In this episode, Grant and I explore how personality profiling, when done well, can become a powerful lens for building trust, navigating differences, and creating psychological safety. We unpack everything from personal boundaries within teams, hybrid team rituals, and the 5 super skills to high-quality conversations. And yes, we go deep on what not to do, like using personality tools as excuses or labels. So if you're leading a team, part of a team, or just curious about what makes relationships work, this one's for you. Let's dive in. Welcome everyone to the Thriving Leaders podcast. Today I'm joined by Grant Gemmell, the Managing Director at Facet5, which is a personality profiling tool that I've been using for over 15 years, which is like a scary thought to think that's probably where Grant and I first met each other back at NAB days when we first started using Facet5. And then you went on to work at Facet, I believe, for the last 14 or so years.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. How time's flying. So welcome, Grant.
Thank you.
Awesome. So today I'm really wanting to pick your brain because I'm officially halfway through writing my book.
Oh, wow.
Tick that milestone off.
Well done.
Yes, getting there. These things take longer than you think. And so the focus of today is really on thriving teams. But before we get into that, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about Facet5 and the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the invite and spending some time having a conversation. I can't believe that 15 years has gone so quickly. So at Facet5, we're a measure of personality with a real focus on potential. So as a trait-based measure, we look at those underlying characteristics of human behavior across time and situation and context. And really what we're doing is helping people, giving people a common language about how to describe themselves that other people understand. And I think when you have that intuitive language that's easy to use and easy to convey and easy to interpret, then what you're actually creating is the bridge of understanding. And it's really helping people to understand how they turn up at work, what some of the preferences are, and why things happen in a particular way. And it's not to be so rigid that we kind of put them into a box. We tend to think of personality a bit more like a lens over a longer period of time, and that a personality evolves, and that through Facet5, you can grow with your personality, get to know it, and create this more conscious flexibility about your own style that suits the situation and the context that you find yourself.
Yeah, I love it. I use it every time I bring a team together to start with because I think it helps teams understand and value their similarities and differences. And I love, the common language that then they can talk about their behavior to then be more intentional how they're going to show up every day that they work together.
That's right. It's often this trickiest part around relationships, isn't it? Is when we start to talk about behavior and how people impact us and some of the triggers that we have. So having that almost third-hand language, that third objective voice sometimes in the relationships makes that a little bit easier.
Yeah. It's even funny, like I think about the amount of times I've done a Facet5 debrief with somebody and they've said, I've never seen my personality written down in words like this before. Like it's like, that just really resonates, but I've never seen it written this way before. So with that theme in the context of thriving teams, like what role does personality play in creating a thriving team?
I think for me, I mean, everybody has a personality. So that's kind of a given. And I think it's really about, as you mentioned before, around similarities and differences in between individuals. It's where we create that mutual understanding, mutual respect between individuals, and a willingness to kind of step into that space. So when we understand what our preferences are, we have a better way of kind of coming together and understanding each other that creates better collaboration, solves problems more quickly, opens up communication channels. And it's not so much that we're trying to you know, become clones of each other. It's just that we have a way of and a language of stepping into that relationship. And I think actually teams are built on relationships, and like any good relationship, they take ongoing effort to make that a. So personality for me is kind of the glue between the cogs for a lot of the attributes of thriving teams.
Yeah. I think even just knowing what to expect of each other and understanding each other's perspectives and preferences, even in terms of how to make a decision, or some people like to process
Yeah.
information more, like even those things make such a huge
Yeah.
difference.
I think
Okay.
approaching it without judgment. I think it's about how do you have that language that allows people to kind of understand themselves, understand the difference, because we make sense of the world through difference, and stepping into that space without that judgment or the bias, and being just open to the individual that's in front of you.
Yeah, definitely. So, what do you think are some of the key elements that make a thriving team? I'm sure you do a lot of work with
Yeah.
teams and you've seen all sorts of forms of teams, but what do you think are the key elements that make a thriving team?
Yeah, so it's I think you're right. I think there's each team is unique for a start, and it is built on relationships. So as I mentioned before, any good relationship requires effort.
Mm,
But then I think there are kind of a bit of a laundry list of essential elements that we tend to work with
mm,
organizations on. We're just having recent conversations about a global team working across kind of 9 or 10 different um, languages and about 12 different territories, and
mm,
really understanding what does thriving mean for them? What does team performance mean for them? I think there's a few elements there, which is self-awareness, understanding your own style,
mm,
and appreciating other people's differences. Space for individual growth and challenge. People need to be able to stretch and contribute meaningfully into the work that they do. Interesting, I think we've been doing a lot more work around clear personal boundaries and role clarity. So everyone knows where they stand and what's required of them. I think the foundation then that underpins most things is mutual trust, and that's evidenced through action. It's aligned through shared values and future vision, so the team's aligned and knows where it's going. And then you get more practical things like productive decision making and problem solving. Not just fast problem solving, just fast decision making that maybe override people or bulldoze people, but more thoughtful, meaningful, inclusive decision making and problem solving. Um, I think then in the work that you do, and certainly in your book around, forward-focused feedback, issues are surfaced and resolved quite proactively. And then there's a strong focus on both resilience and resourcefulness, I think, in a team, because you can't have a thriving team that's not healthy. So when you have collective focus on individual and team health and resourcefulness, then I think that underpins it. But I think the standout factor for us is the quality of the communication or dialogue that you
mm,
have. And it's not about
mm.
talking more, it's probably about talking better. And really, that keeps everything else in motion.
So I'm really interested to find out a bit more about these personal boundaries that you mentioned before and having really clear personal boundaries. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think in this day and age, I think where we are working from home more, we've got more of a 24/7 attitude to work. We are working across time zones in particular. I think it's important to have some personal boundaries about when work starts and when work stops. You think about my team, we've got a lot of small, young families, for example, and priority has to come to family, and work has to be an enabler of. So I think it's around really understanding what is it that the person requires out of their job, and then how does that feed into the life that they live beyond the walls
Mhm.
of work. So thinking about organising meetings across different time zones, cultural understanding around what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate, understanding that sometimes I need a bit more flexibility about how I go about working, And that should all come under that. I think it all comes under that personal boundaries piece. What is it for me that work enables? What is it? Are those boundaries around where I'm okay to say no or can't attend, or I need a different set of criteria or structure or framework to support me in my work?
Yeah. I'd spoken when I caught up with Dermot Crowley, he talked about creating these team agreements where you can actually articulate some of these personal boundaries as well. So everyone's on the
Yeah.
same page in terms of what to expect, which I think is really, really powerful.
I think the other thing then is if you overlay the personality aspect there, which is the personal boundaries, which is, how much expectation do you have of other people? Are you
Mm,
clear about your expectation and their desire to reciprocate, for example, or even their own personal style about, personal space and boundaries in that way, and the way that you communicate and engage? They're all personal boundaries which just need to be articulated. Sounds easy, but
mm.
not always. Yeah.
And have you seen many teams that you work with try and weaponize personality tools instead of using them for understanding, using them for evil and not
Yeah.
good? But you know what I mean? And what's
Yeah, that kind of
the
weaponization really.
yeah,
Yeah.
or like
I
putting
see.
people in a box and being like, "Oh, you're this way." So,
Yeah, for
what have you
sure.
seen?
I think you've probably seen a lot of it in the last kind of 20 years of using personality instruments. You do see that. That's who I am. That's who they are. We don't flex. It's kind of like an excuse to not to extend your behavior or to step into a relationship, maybe to put up a boundary
Mm,
around what's actually acceptable, or not willing to take kind of accountability for who you are. And we see that weaponization, I suppose, or that categorization, and it comes with any classification process
mm,
in my mind. It doesn't matter what it is. The problem is, I think the boxes and those things become labels, and those labels limits. And I think in
mm,
thriving teams, the articulation of personal boundary is fine, but when you're starting to use your personality as an excuse or a barrier to contribute or to be accountable, then it becomes a limit. And you might, you know, I'll be a bit more controversial. I think you see it in more in typologies. I'm green, you're yellow. That's it. I'm an E,
yeah,
you're an I. We hear this generalization of, oh, I'm an extrovert, you're an introvert. I think it doesn't get to the nuance of the individual. What a great personality instrument should do is deal with the nuance. It should
mm,
create a way of creating curiosity about who you are and other people. And I think um, box people in, we dial down that curiosity. We're finding that we get more excuses for poor behavior. At times it kills growth and collaboration. So I think it's about understanding each other better, and that way we're not reinforcing silos or biases or assumptions in that. And it kind of comes back to that antidote around that, which is you use personality as a lens, not a label. It's not a, it's not just because it's written down, it doesn't mean it's black and white and that you can't grow from there. Personality is an evolving aspect of all of us. You can't be impacted by your knowledge and skills and experiences and expect your personality to remain static. I think from a trait perspective, our theory is that it just evolves in a more predictable way and allows people to understand themselves over that time and situation in a way that feels a bit more secure and a bit more predictable.
mm. And that's what I like about
Mm.
Facet. It kind of talks almost about the relativity, like it's on a more of a scale rather than being
Mm.
put in a box. And I guess
Yeah.
I'm going slightly off topic here, but what I also hear
Mm.
a lot is, "Oh, that's what I would have been like 20 years ago, but I'm now like this." So what's your kind of
Yeah.
response to that in terms of personality, stabilizing in our mid-20s and, us learning
Yeah.
and growing? Like what do you think?
I would say that's a good thing. I think if you haven't changed since your 20s, then you haven't really grown as an individual. What I would say is at a certain time in your life, your personality does settle down. And you
Mm,
can see echoes of your personality, I think, all the way through your life. Maybe you become a little bit more honest with yourself about how you respond, because we're a self response questionnaire, and you look at yourself and you're a bit more honest with how you respond. So therefore, you maybe you're getting a clearer lens around that. But it doesn't mean that your personality can't change, and that's an okay thing to happen. I think what we need to do is just explore that a little bit. What are the drivers of that change? How comfortable are you with that? I think the biggest thing we get is I'm different at home to how I'm at work. And yes, I think you probably would be because actually you think about the social controls or social context that we find ourselves. Our personality is activated in different ways in different contexts. What we try to do is get kind of below that and understand where you're starting from, and then what flexibility do you demonstrate and how authentic does that become, or inauthentic does it become, and how far do you stretch your personality in different situations? Is that effortful? Is it effortless, for example? But it
Mm.
gets to the meaning of it. And I think that's the great thing about personality is it's not about a fixed identity. It's about possibility. It's about creating that conscious flexibility about your style. But just like everything, if you want to flex from somewhere, want to go somewhere, you have to know where you're starting from. And that's really what personality should be. It should be just that lens that you're looking through and helping you kind of grow and develop, not a diagnosis.
Yeah. And having that self awareness so you can be more intentional in terms of how you want to behave as well in those
That's
situations.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned before about these quality conversations and dialogue. And
Mm,
this is something I'm literally just about to start writing about in the book. So
yeah.
I met with Amy Edmondson. She spoke about quality for conversations and that teams aren't always equipped to have these quality conversations. And then
Mm,
I often talk about how teams need to have healthy, challenging debate. And
mm,
David Kleinenbach, when I interviewed him, he challenged me on the word debate and said, "Well, is it dialogue rather than debate? Because there can be negative connotations towards debate as well." And
yeah.
so keen to kind of see, like, based on what you're seeing working with teams around what these quality conversations look like and how teams can have more
Mm.
meaningful dialogue.
Yeah, I think all the work that we've been doing, and I kind of sound like a bit of a broken record over this podcast, but the quality of the conversation that you're having is
Mm.
key, not the quantity, because we all believe that through our meetings, we have lots of meetings and we talk a lot. But
Mm.
actually, are we having a conversation? What's the depth and purpose of the dialogue that we're actually having? And there's a saying which is face to face dialogue is still the most effective technology on earth to build relevant common ground. We sense make through conversation, it's how we communicate. And it seems to be that when we get into work, we have this sense of not getting it quite right or not spending enough time on that. It's just kind of like relationships, really. Unless you're
Mm.
putting effort into it, then it's not going to go in the right direction. So conversations are exactly the same way. So we look at what we call the 5 super skills of great conversations or the 5 aspects of conversations. And they start with turning up, being present. And now this is kind of an obvious one, but physically turning up is fine, but actually emotionally and mentally turning up, being in the room and being present with somebody is a whole different ballgame. We are so bombarded with lots of information, and you'll see it day to day. You know, you're in a conversation and somebody's Apple Watch will beep and you've lost them for that
Mm.
microsecond and it takes them a while to catch up. They're coming into the room, uh, with a whole set of thoughts and images and biases and things. So turning up and being present is critical because it's the first thing that you need to do. But it's not as easy as people think. It's about how do you remove the distraction? How do you turn up fully in that conversation? I think the next one we call hyper awareness, but it really talks about bias. It talks about managing your own awareness of bias, how you're feeling in the moment. And often when we check in with people, it's like, how are you going? Sometimes we just need to kind of clear our head from the conversation that we've rushed from and into. And sometimes some people are just thirsty.
Mm.
Sometimes they're tired. Sometimes they're just hungry. And all of those sort of things distract
Mm.
us
And there's a real
from
oh, book. No,
the
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because
It
we
is.
do,
Yeah.
we come in and based on our previous experience, the 5 minutes that we've had before,
Yeah.
and we don't, and it's something that we've noticed in kind of the rhythms. It's that we've lost the check-in bit. How you be for the conversation.
Mhm.
You're going to spend 5 minutes kind of decompressing. We always say to people, when you come into a conversation, imagine that you've got this coat of worries and work and life. Take it off and hang it on the hook outside. No one's going to steal that. No one wants your coat. They've got their own.
Yeah.
Put it out there. You can pick it up on the way back out again. And it helps you kind of unload and be a bit more present. Put all of that stuff aside and be here. Because when you do that, you start to listen more and you start to decode more.
Mm.
So you get behind the intent of the conversation. You can start then asking the right questions. You can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful conversation. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue. And then you can start having a meaningful dialogue not being a diatribe, but actually a two-way or multi-way conversation. I think that the fourth thing is courage or having your voice. We often think about when we come into a conversation that we have to be sometimes inactive or not have an opinion. And I think all conversations have to be two-way. And sometimes we have to have a bit more courage about finding our voice and bringing that voice forward in order
Mm.
to extend the conversation and deepen the conversation as well. And interestingly, the thing that I struggle with is what we call flow control, which is every conversation has a start, a middle, and an end. No conversation varies from that. So it's about when somebody does come into a conversation, what are you here for? What do you need from this conversation? What do I need from you? How will we navigate that in the middle of that conversation? And do we make sure that people walk away at the end of the conversation with what they need? Or they put their hand up and saying, I haven't got what I need yet. Here's what I need to get from that. So it's a really interesting dynamic, being present, managing your biases, asking the right questions,
Mhm.
voicing your opinion with courage and respect, and structuring the conversation that is mutually beneficial for each person.
I love that. I like that 5-step process. So,
Yeah.
like, you've mentioned a couple of rituals, even by having that check-in at the
Mm.
start of the thing, but are there other kind of rhythms or rituals that you've seen work really well with teams so that they stay connected even when they might be in a hybrid or geographically dispersed as well?
Yeah, I think when I was thinking about this last night, getting prepared, I was thinking about what do I miss about the conversations? Because most of my meetings are now
Mm.
online. Very lucky to speak with people all over the world.
Mm.
And during 2020, around COVID, for example, we're having different conversations. We're having more human conversations. We had this global thing that bound us together. Now, it wasn't a great thing to bind us together, but actually, what we were doing was we're actually having human moments. We were checking in, we're asking how people were, and we were actually interested in that as
Mm.
well because we were kind of checking in on ourselves and our response in comparison to other people.
Mm.
So I think we've drifted away from that. Things are a lot more transactional. We've gone back to the busyness. We've normalized digital work and virtual work and being across different time zones. So it would be nice to bring some humanity back
Mm.
into the conversations. How are you going? How's the family? Knowing a little bit more than just the tip of the iceberg is always nice. Because at our heart, we want to try to create human moments. And I think when we do that, we build trust, we build openness, we build respect for each other as well. Another ritual which we're trying to be more consistent with, and I think that it kind of comes in another question that I was looking at, which is what is it that you can help teams to create or thrive beyond, say, a teaming session. And this is one of those, which is be intentional about the ask of somebody. Be clear why you need something from. Let people know it's about I need their input, I need their support, I need their wisdom or their knowledge, and that what's in it for them. And that's a really important aspect. It shows their time and capacity, especially when you're working across time zones and different screens and things like that.
Mm.
So that intention is don't just rock up. And it kind of comes back to the flow control. Be prepared, be ready, check in with them first. I think the other one is about obviously using your Facet5 language in everyday conversations. It's about not putting the report down and forgetting about it. It's about living that language. And we talk about dialing up and dialing down in our meetings. So I'm dialing up my goal focus today. I'm dialing up my curiosity. I'm dialing down my enthusiasm because I'm having to do this type of work. What it
Mm.
does is help people understand or signal that you're flexing your style. I think that also builds trust and support, and it helps people understand where your focus is, that you may be a bit more distracted or you may be a bit more, hard nosed, or you may be a bit more curious. I
Mm.
think it's such a great way to use some of the language that people understand, and it helps kind of build contextual understanding around where you are at any particular time in your day.
Yeah. I think I might steal that because we have for our team meeting on a
Mm,
Monday, we share what the one most important thing for us to achieve this week is, and then
yeah,
what's our intention for the week in terms of the qualities we
yeah,
wanna bring. But I haven't
yeah,
actually been drawing on facet language about what we might need to dial
yeah,
up or dial back for that, and I think that would be useful because obviously everyone in my team has done facet. So
Yeah.
I think that's good language. And then the other ritual we have for our Friday meeting is we talk about our wins and learnings for the week. And at the
Yeah.
end of the
Nice.
meeting, we talk about what we're most grateful for. So like we've kind of got these
Yep.
little rituals and rhythms that help us kind of learn, but be more intentional. But I like the
Yeah.
use of the facet language to help with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Cool.
like the idea of that the wins, that celebration at the end of the week when we don't make
Yeah.
a lot of time to reflect and look back. We always look at the amount of sand or mountain that we have to get up or move. But actually,
Yeah.
when we look behind us, it may be a small amount, but it could be quite significant. And I think that's the thing is where we start to create that connection and understanding around individual relationships and complexity of our work is sometimes it didn't look like a lot, but it took a lot. And it's helping people recognize that's important as well.
I think we kind of learn from our successes and also our mistakes as well, and how we actually build that good practice then.
Yeah.
Forward.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing that you said before about hybrid, which I found quite interesting, was last week I was facilitating, a full day session,
Mm.
and it was like 25 minutes past. It was supposed to start at 8:30, and there was only one person there, and we are commenting on like, where is everyone? And everyone like rocked up right on the
Yeah.
dot. And I said, oh, in the
Gosh.
past when
Yes.
you had a full day session, people would rock up 15 minutes early, get your seat, get your
Yeah.
bearings, get your cup of tea.
Yeah.
Whereas now, like everyone's so used to, like, I just press a button and I'm on, that they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I need to be there right now." And it's just funny, it's almost I've forgotten some of the old rituals that were quite helpful, because that's also when you connect with
Yeah.
people and chat with, like, your fellow
That's
participants
right.
and all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff too. How do we, like
It's the inter moments, it's the interaction moments, the interactivity moments that I miss. We're actually and we're doing a lot more face-to-face work now than we've ever done. So
Yeah,
people are coming back and they're purposely bringing people together, and we're purposely creating space in conversations in our delivery for those moments to connect. So much more happens in those kind of moments together, making coffee or having a sandwich or whatever it is, than actually sometimes the activity itself.
yeah. Well, I've been reflecting on, like, how do I create more space in my delivery? But then I'm
Mm,
reflecting on that now as I'm writing, like, I'm literally starting to write the chapter on connection from tomorrow.
mm,
And, like, how do you create space like in your week as a team, in your operating rhythm, for those
mm.
informal connections outside of meetings or
Yep.
inside of meetings, and like, what does space
Yep.
look like? Because it feels,
Yep.
you know me pretty well, like I'm pretty good at filling space, like, let's be honest. But how do you create space for those informal connections? And have you seen anything in your work about how teams do build connection both inside and outside of meetings?
I think in terms of the team itself, it does come back to, I think it's about how do you create it's almost permission giving. So a shared focus, we know that teams, when they have a shared focus and they have a shared vision and shared values, they tend to connect more. So it becomes easier to align themselves and to work on that together. I think where you have a focus from moving from solo players to kind of collective entrepreneurism, where people have to come together and you're pushing them together in order to do that. Um, but I think the quality of the interaction then becomes really important. And then the type of conversations that you're having, and sometimes permission giving and just saying, I don't need you. For example, if I think about the work that we do with teams, we used to do a lot of, at the end, form commitments and requests. What are you going to commit to the team? What are you going to request from them? What are
Mm.
you going to action? And there was always a long laundry list of actions that teams would take away. And in reality, 99% of those kind of never got done. So what we're doing now in terms of creating connection inside and outside the meeting is just continue doing what you already do, but put more focus on it. And that's the thing that we do the most is have conversations. Dial into that conversation a little bit more, be a bit more structured about it, be a bit more intentful around that. And actually, that's all you need to do. So if you're going away with a long set of actions that you're not going to do versus actually have a depth of conversation, have a breadth of conversation that you're not having now, and be really present, be willing to, get to the crux of the conversation and solve the problem based around the context, based around that vision or the shared value, then actually that's what's going to hold people together. Because in those moments, in those conversations, you are learning more about the individual if you're really paying attention, both body language, what's going on for them, where their focus is, what they're dialing up, what they're dialing down, what their successes are. It's all those little micro connections which I think build kind of a lattice or a framework
Mm,
or a scaffolding in the relationship, which I think is really important. That's the connection
mm,
piece. That's where you make space in your day for more quality conversations. Don't turn up at 8:29. Turn up at 8:25 and spend 4
mm,
minutes. The other thing that we do, and think about, just cycling back to rituals, is I had this habit of trying to finish about 10 minutes early on some of the calls. And I always say to people, I'm going to give you 10 minutes back
mm,
of your day. There are a few rules. You can't check your emails. You can't go back to your desk. You can do a couple of things. Go outside if you can,
mm,
check out the weather,
mm,
take a big breath of fresh air, ring a family member
mm.
or text them. I don't mind. Pat your dog or just go outside and stare outside into space. But take 10 minutes and just kind of reset your nervous system and then come back in. The world is not going to go anywhere. Your work's not going to go anywhere. But actually, that 10 minutes can be a nice, pleasant thing to do at times as
Well, it's
well.
almost like a
Mm.
mindfulness moment, but it also gives you the opportunity to like
Yeah.
calibrate. I went and did the lighthouse walk, and normally if I do it with a
Nice.
family member or a friend, or I have like I'm listening to a podcast or whatever, and I had to be
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh no, I'm gonna take my headphones out. I'm gonna leave my phone. I'm just gonna walk and not talk to anyone and just
Yeah.
take it all in and
Mm.
actually just try to create
Yeah.
those more mindful moments because I guess our mind takes us to places and that's often when creativity
Yeah.
happens too. Yeah.
It does. I think it also happens in a team where we are so busy at
Mm,
110%. And without creating some capacity, whether that's a leader's role or an individual's role or organizational role, is that there is some time to stop and think and absorb and reflect. And I think we just can't be plugged in with such intensity all the time for it not to have an impact on individuals, both the individual, the quality of their output, the health and well-being, their resourcefulness and resilience, but also the relationships that they have within the team as well. We need space to create connection
yeah.
and we need to put that space in. And that, while people often say to me that I don't have the time, actually it's what we value is where we put our time. So if you
Mhm.
start to value the relationship, you value the connection, you value understanding each other, then you will make the time. It's readjusting your mindset around that, I think, becomes very important.
Yeah, definitely. Because when I work with teams, we create a team purpose, we create some
Mm,
values we want to demonstrate when we're together, no more than three,
yeah,
because people can't remember more than
yeah.
three things. I'm going to use the team agreements, which is some additional agreements, such as it could be, when we show up, we're present, whatever it might be. But even just small things like agreeing what our meeting length is. Like I've just changed because I've got a booking link where people can book in my calendar. And I
Mm,
sometimes go from back to back meetings for
mm,
hours unless I block time in my calendar. But now I've changed all my meeting lengths to 25 minutes from half an hour, 40 minutes from 45 minutes, 55 minutes, just so I have like an expectation that I'm actually going to finish 5 minutes before you expect me to. So
yeah,
I can go to
yeah,
the bathroom and have a breather and,
yeah,
fresh
yeah,
air. And
yeah,
I know that then I'm
exactly.
better for my next meeting because I've had that kind of time to decompress from you're not going from one thing to the next. So how do you
Yeah.
create those rhythms with your team, I think makes a real difference.
And I think it's something that I miss, when we're working in Docklands, for example, big
Mm,
building, multiple floors, you could never get a meeting room where you worked. But
yeah,
actually, now I reflect on it, that transit time between buildings, between floors, up and down stairs was actually a natural decompression. And it was a really nice, interesting kind of reflection because we do jump in and
mm,
to meetings. Oh, 2 minutes, I'll just go and grab a coffee. Oh, I just need to go to the bathroom. Whereas there, actually, you
yeah.
walked with somebody, you caught up with somebody, you did something a bit more human. And
And you almost
even if
debrief
you
the
do,
meeting as well, like, "Oh, what did you take out of" and kind of could do
yeah,
as well. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, take your head
um,
out of where you were, get it into where you're going.
yeah. So,
Mm,
you mentioned before about after you have a teaming session, instead of getting people to take action, you're kind of getting people to collaborate and have
mm.
more intentional conversations. So is that intention as a team or one-on-one or both? Tell me a little bit more about, like, how you set that up.
So I think it's kind of yes and yes. It has to be intentionally, accountability has to sit with the individual, and that accountability has to be uh, both a behavior shift and mindset shift around the value of that conversation in the first place. But I think it actually starts before you do a teaming session and they go through that, understanding what is it that they're journeying on and what's important to them, where they're at.
Mm.
And I think unless you structure the actual session in the day to day, it won't stick anyway.
Mm.
So if you purposely take people out and discuss something which is kind of tangential to the problems that they're facing, it will always get moved aside. So focus on the issue at hand. And then I think when you inside of that actual sort of microcosm, that space, it's creating more space for conversation. So we're role modeling that
Mm.
as well. And then, as I said before, it's about having the commitment to continue the quality of the conversation. So we often ask, how was the conversations that you had today? Were they more meaningful than you normally have? And people often say, yeah, it feels like I've got a lot more out of it because I've put more my attention to it.
Mm.
I'm not lacking as much focus. I can give you my whole attention. I'm really trying to understand, taking the time to do that. So what we're already doing is kind of setting permission and an example of saying, what's stopping you from doing that outside of this particular session? How would you take that into the work that you do day to day? Because you're already having conversations. So what's the difference here around doing that? It's just about making sure that the conversation's just putting your attention to it a little bit and being a little bit more structured and a little bit more deliberate and maybe sometimes a bit more courageous in the conversations that you're actually having. I think those small but real kind of dialogue shifts, ultimately they create more clarity for the individuals. You're getting better sense, you're making sense again of what's required. You're not going back and saying, could you just remind me what I was supposed to do? Or I wasn't quite listening to that. I'm really
Yeah.
guilty of that as I'm trying to, my head's in the next meeting or in next conversation. Ultimately, you're getting a deeper understanding of what the actual potential is, the opportunity, the issue, or even just a deeper understanding of where the person's at and how you can meet where they're at
Mm.
as well. It drives greater collaboration and quicker collaboration as well because you have that clarity, you have that understanding. And I think it provides a bit more meaning to the work and the roles that we play because we're creating that more human interaction. And that embeds some of more momentum and keeps that momentum alive as well. So I think it's, again, it all kind of stems back to that quality of the dialogue, creating
Mm.
space in sessions that you already run, role modeling that. And sometimes we just need to be told or be given permission. It's like, just go away and do that. I'm not asking you to do anything else. And it's quite funny. I can literally see people's shoulders come down and they take a big
Mm.
breath or a sigh of relief. It's like, I'm not asking you to go away and do any after this session.
Yeah.
There's always a catch, of course, which is, and I need you to have better conversations.
Yeah, which I think makes a huge difference if people are collaborating together. And that's why I
Mm,
often I work with teams over a period of time. We work on real business challenges together. So they're kind of
yeah,
practicing that with something that's
yeah.
real online for them too, which I think is important too. You mentioned the word individual accountability, and I do love talking about
Mm,
accountability. It's literally the
yeah.
chapter I've just finished writing. And, I talk about the fact we have individual accountability, which is like our own psychological ownership to deliver on outcomes and also our behavior. There's shared
Mm,
accountability that happens between team members within a team. So you need to have
yeah.
some shared goals. And then there's collective accountability, which happens between teams. So this is about cross-functional collaboration, or
Mm,
it kind of like talks about teams of teams and how you get that kind of horizontal leadership or stakeholder engagement. But specifically around teams, often we expect the leader to hold everyone accountable. Is there anything you recommend to create that culture of shared accountability within a team?
yeah, it's quite a complex topic, isn't it? Accountability and the role of the leader and where it stops and where the individual picks up. And I think we're moving, certainly, hopefully, moving more away from command and control to more ask and empower from a leadership perspective.
Mm.
I think when we create accountability, there's the expectation we use that word and you should be more accountable. But
Mm.
actually, I think both leader and individual need to be able to have a willingness to step into that space. So from an individual perspective, it's not just doing the task, but stepping into their role with initiative and intent, being able to do that with the right resources and the right skills and the right support enabling that. And I think there has to be a desire to do that. Not everybody wants that. Not everybody Some people prefer clear direction and they want to be set up for success, and other people will step into that space naturally. I think leaders then need the ability to feel confident to step back and enable that to actually happen. So it's okay for things to go wrong and support them and learn from those moments, which create that safety and trust, that it's okay to kind of extend yourself. I think that also then models reflection, it models great feedback, it helps course correct versus create a blame culture. And it shifts to more of a leader as that coach or mentor model. Now, some leaders are great at coaching, and that's but other leaders are better at mentoring. They're better at,
Mm.
setting direction and helping people and bring their experience into that. I think it's important that one size doesn't fit all in that space, and our personality can certainly help us understand that. And as I mentioned before, some people like clear direction. They like to be set up for success. They know that they just need a bit more scaffolding, please, to feel ready. So I think when we create shared accountability, it's not so much that we're letting go completely from a leader perspective and picking up everything completely from an individual. It's about building capability and co-creating ownership over a period of time. And I think that has to be at an individual connection. What does accountability look like? How comfortable are you with it? How safe do you feel in ultimately putting your head on the chopping block for something as well? And what's the outcome if you aren't successful in that? So I think it really is a complex topic which I haven't mastered myself, because I'm often the person who's like can see something failing, so I want to step in and save somebody. I don't want them to do that. But I've also realized without that learning,
Mm.
then actually how do they course correct themselves next time if they've always got somebody there to kind of pick it up or manage things for them? And how do you I think the other thing, is how do you give somebody a sense of pride about what they do and self-confidence and self-efficacy? And I think when we allow people to be more accountable and we trust them around that, we raise them up. And then when we raise one person up, we're raising other people up because they're naturally going to help and kind of ripple across a team, across an organization.
Yeah, and I think that's how you create that environment that's psychologically safe. So if you do fail, it's not held
Yeah.
against you and those sorts of things culturally as a team.
Yeah. Mm.
So as you're speaking, I'm thinking about when I'm working with teams, and I find that decision
Mm.
making seems to be a hot topic when you're working with teams, depending on the
Yeah.
dynamic in the team. There could be, we always default to the leader to make the decision, or maybe we're not
Yeah.
really good at making decisions. We talk a lot, we talk in circles, but we haven't
Yeah.
actually got an outcome or
Yeah.
agreed where we're going, got aligned
Yeah.
to where we're headed. With the work that you and Facet5 does with teams, is there any kind of insight you have around decision making and what effective decision making as a team looks like?
Well, I think
That's a big question. No.
that's a big question. Yeah. Um, I think it comes down to the team and what they're there to do. So there
Mm,
are some teams which require a hierarchy, decision making bubbles up, and it creates pace and momentum for the team. And maybe they're kind of the teams is well defined, the roles well defined, the processes are well defined. Things naturally happen and they bubble up and they get solved quite quickly. That's less and less, I think. I think
mm,
teams now, the role of the leader isn't so much to have all the answers, but know what questions to ask, bring the right people into that
mm,
process. And again, our personality drives the way that we make decisions. So I've got quite a lot of will,
mm.
quite a lot of energy. So my natural intent is to drive to a decision quite quickly and push hard. Got a preformed view. The counter is that I engage people who maybe reinforce my view as opposed to expand out my idea and have some counter ideas around that. I feel that like that slows me down and I've just got so much to do and I'm trapped in this busyness. So I think when we talk about effective decisions, what we, from a team perspective, is we ask them, what would you see and do, and how would people behave, and what processes would be in place to create effective decisions in your context? Because different contexts require different models and different capabilities. And then we ask them, and we have it's the same thing we do with most capabilities is what are you seeing? Not that we trust each other, but what do you actually see and hear and can identify people doing that enable that effective process? Then actually, what are the things that you would see people do that would disable that or take away from the process? now that you've got that, let's have a look at your personality around the things that you do quite naturally that do that. Let's have a look at the things or the behaviors that you may express that actually take away from that. It's until we get to some observable behavior that you can't get, people can see it and they can start to call it out and they can start to use language that they've defined and they've taken ownership around that. So if effective decision making looks like it's quite collaborative, consensus driven, and it's specialist in terms of we default to people's knowledge and role, great.
Mm,
But it's up to the team, I think, and up to the organization, or particularly the team, I think, around what does effective decision making look
mm.
like for you, given what you know about your role and what's expected of you.
Yeah. And I think I love the calling out of the observable behaviors. I think that's really important
Mm,
because often that's where people might have blind spots as well in terms of what we default to
yeah,
doing as a team. And then you can be a lot more
yeah.
intentional again in terms of, well, what are we going to experiment with or what do we want to try going forward? Yeah.
And in the moment, I think we often coach people in saying, this is where you need to find some voice and some courage in some of the conversations that you have. If you're somebody who is low confrontation, for example, and very accommodating with low determination and higher emotionality from our model perspective, that may create hesitancy. You may actually have a good idea. You may have a counter idea. You may be able to extend out some of the thinking and inform that. But your natural hesitation means that you may miss the moment. So not only are we uh, kind of creating the criteria for effective decisions, we then ask people, what is it you need in place for you to contribute to those effective decisions as well? Because that then says, actually, what I need is you to hold me up and slow me down
Mm,
versus other people. I need you to make space for me. I know that I've got the space, but sometimes I need to be invited in.
mm,
And sometimes when I've said something, it's because I've really thought about it. I need that recognized. So not only are the framework for decision making is in place there, but what is it that I need in place? What's the environment look like for
mm.
me to contribute successfully in that space?
Yeah. So like understanding what our natural style is, but also kind of what we need or what our requests are as well, based on us working
Yeah,
together.
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Awesome. So, what would you say are the top three biggest leadership challenges that teams are experiencing right now? Because obviously, you get lots of exposure globally. What would you say are some
Yeah.
of the leadership team challenges that they're experiencing, and how might they work through some of them?
Yeah. So we're currently doing a bit of a global study. Actually, when we've been talking to leaders, we've been kind of capturing the information and having a look at, are there global trends? Is there trends by industry or trends by country or
Mm,
generation, for example? But there's probably three that I'm seeing a little bit more frequently, which is pace and complexity.
mm,
I don't think anybody would deny that the speed of change is relentless. The 24/7 kind of business cycle where across more countries things just happen faster, and being on all
mm,
all the time is hard for a leader.
mm,
And I think we're not finding time to slow down and to create focus to think and to reflect and look at meaningful execution. We're just looking at speed and doing. And we often talk about with teams and with my team and with organizations, which is there is a difference between doing and acting.
mm,
Doing is kind of a response to things. You're doing stuff and it feels a bit untethered to a goal. Whereas action is a bit more premeditated. Taking action, you know why you're doing it. So it's getting away from the doing and running around to the acting. It's a bit semantic, but it kind of works for us. I think there's a change in role of leadership as well. I think the expectation of leaders is no longer, as I mentioned before, about having all the answers, but really about facilitating answers and creating the environment for people to turn up as their best self. They
mm,
don't get to have social boundaries around that and some rules around that, but enabling people to kind of bring them full selves into their workplace, their experience, their knowledge, their personality. I think it's the constant shift there that leaders are having to make to adapt and flex their style depending on who they're working with and what they're working with, and the context that they're working with is getting more complex. So again, we're focused much more on self-awareness and
mm.
emotional intelligence with our leaders. around how not only who they are, but how can they flex their style um, a little bit more fluidly. Now that comes from both understanding, sometimes a skill, some feedback. Are they turning up in the right way, and course correction? I think the last one is a bit more geopolitical just at the moment, and we
Mm.
tend to avoid that in our conversations. But I think there is a trend, an unfortunate trend to toxic masculinity coming back into global leadership. And it is such a disappointing retrofit back to the 1950s, where we are rebelling against diversity, equity, inclusion. We're rebelling against welcoming people in. And I think we are trying to use scare tactics, which are losing that human connection. We're
Mm.
using fear as a leadership model versus collaboration and helping people sort of thrive and grow together. And I think that's a real challenge for some leaders in some organizations where the environment in which they operate is quite counter to the values of them, of who they are and the organization that they support. Now, I think over a longer period of time, truth will tell out around that, and I hope that pendulum swings back. But I think the more, and it's not just women leaders who I speak with, and I would say I speak with a lot more women, successful women leaders now, which is amazing. It's also men who are talking about that toxic
Mm.
masculinity and how that's communicated. And they're seeing that played out in some individuals within the team that they feel like they've been given permission to act in a way which is kind of counter to the way that we would normally expect people to turn up.
Yeah, which I think is an interesting one because I completely agree with the three things you've mentioned, but whether the leader as a facilitator and coach will shift if the toxic masculinity continues because it might make us
Mm,
go back more to a command and control. You need to be in the office 5 days a week. And it's going to be quite an
yeah,
interesting tension.
yeah. I think it's the tension is either we either become complicit with that, or we, as a broader society, we push back on that and say,
Mm.
"Hey, actually, yeah, we have evolved from that. Unfortunately, we have a small group of middle-aged, older white men who
Mm.
have just kind of started to promote that again, and that it's just not necessary. And I think, when we have leaders who prioritize reflection and connection over reaction, so we step from that, we help people understand what change and what's happening around them, and we talk honestly about that. And I think if we keep investing in our leaders with human skills, not just technical skills, not just role based skills, but actual human skills.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. So, if you could leave our listeners with one message about thriving teams, what would that be?
So I think, kind of just to repeat myself, a bit like a broken record, it does come down to the quality of the conversations that you are having. I think thriving teams just don't work hard. They talk well and they take individual and collective health seriously, because you can't have a thriving team that's not healthy. I think it's through the conversations that we sense make, align, and adapt. So we get to know each other, we understand where we're going, we collaborate. It creates that clarity, connection, and important, I think it creates momentum, which is often something that we forget about in a team. And we're not talking about the number of meetings or the number of conversations you're having. We're talking about the depth, the openness, and the intent behind those. So increasing the quality of your conversations. And I think when we prioritize honest, constructive dialogue, not only do we build trust, we raise and surface problems early, we get to negotiate those, and we move forward together. So I think if you want to build a thriving team, start with the start with having better conversations.
Yeah, I love that. The quality and depth of the conversations is critical.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
excellent. Well, thanks, Grant. I absolutely loved our chat today and really appreciate you being part of the Thriving Leaders podcast. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And all the best with your next book. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning into this conversation with Grant. I hope it sparked something for you, whether it was around self-awareness, team connection, or the quality of conversations that you have every day. For me, it was about creating space in our day for really intentional collaboration and about how we have better conversations and truly connect. I also liked our discussion about personal boundaries within teams. I also love the conversation about how we flex our leadership style and dial up and dial down different parts of our personality based on the situation. As always, I'd love to hear what resonated for you. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, drop me a note, or share this episode with a fellow leader who you think would find this valuable. Until next time, keep leading, learning, and thriving. Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, including our Thriving Leaders program, Thriving Women in Leadership, and Thriving Teams, as well as executive and team coaching, keynote speaking or facilitation, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful leadership and team development insights and tools, as well as our podcast. You can also grab your copy of my book, Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently. It's also available at all good online retailers on Audible, Spotify, and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive.